for joining us this morning. Thank you for attending. We appreciate everything you do for transit and for all of our MPTA members to move transit forward in Missouri. Our goal with today's discussion is to provide an update on the KC Streetcar, its wins, and where it's headed from here with its expansion projects. We will then turn the discussion to the ever important regional funding and where does KC go from here to fund future expansions of not only the streetcar, but transit in general. To kick things off, we're going to have some introductory remarks from each of our panelists, and then we're going to open the discussion to Q&A from our attendees. As a reminder, throughout this entire program, please place your questions in either the chat box in the Q&A, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can as we continue through the conversation. So let's begin by welcoming our panelists this morning. Tom Guerin, the Executive Director of the Kansas City Streetcar Authority, and David Johnson, Project Leader at TransPro and Chair of the Kansas City Regional Transit Alliance, not to mention a Missouri Public Transit Association board member, to our panel this morning. So welcome, both of you.
Good morning.
Thank you, Kim.
So let's begin the conversation with Tom. Would you like to lead us off with an update on the status of the KC Streetcar and the expansion plans that are in the works?
Kim, I would be happy to. Let me go ahead and pull up some slides and walk through a little bit of our story in Kansas City, starting from really the very beginning. And I'm going to walk through this pretty quickly and then pass the torch to David to talk about where we go as a region from here. But obviously, we're actively moving forward right now in Kansas City, and we're excited about that. It really all starts, though, for us on the streetcar side back in really 2010 and 2011, doing the hard work, the planning, local advocacy. David was a part of a group of advocates at the time, helping to carry the local torch that we could do big things in Kansas City and that we deserved better, higher quality public transportation. That all led to a project that took hold in really 2011 and moved to construction in 2014 and opened in 2016, which was our downtown starter line project. And we can get into a lot of the details about governance and funding and all of the things, but it really was a record pace from sort of planning to implementation. And it was the result of not just local advocacy, but strong local leadership and a vision for our downtown that we wanted to use transportation as a catalyst for regrowing our city, obviously reconnecting our city, and sort of elevating the presence of public transit for all of Kansas City. And this is a route map on the left, and then you see the aerial photo. The goal with this initial project was really to be a connector of 4 independent districts downtown. We have the River Market, the Downtown Loop, the Crossroads, and then Union Station and Crown Center. This wasn't intended to be a high-speed, long-distance commuter line. It really was what we would call a pedestrian accelerator or connector. And while not super fast, it was very intentionally planned and designed to be direct, efficient, and then reliable, frequent, and great coverage hours. So lowering the barrier to use, encouraging utilization, and making it as direct and easy to use as possible. When we started the process, though, we had to ask ourselves, why would we build a streetcar? And we really came up as a local partnership team with these 4 goals: connect, develop, thrive, and sustain, before we ever built the project. And we've sort of used them to be the evaluation metrics to gauge how are we doing. And we can say with a high degree of confidence that we've really met and exceeded all of our aspirational goals in really a short period of time. Over 11 million passenger trips. It pretty quickly became the highest ridership route in the region. Could talk more about development, but very significant development impacts downtown, not just new development, but supporting existing businesses. And then obviously sustain, not just financially successful, but it really moved the needle from a public perception standpoint in terms of public satisfaction, the view of the system as adding real value to downtown. And then obviously that helps us have a conversation about where we go. So here's a few pictures of obviously the impact of the construction, some of the transformation on the development side. We're hoping to put a stake in the ground to attract people and jobs back to the core of our city. And we saw great returns. These were surface parking lots in a few of these pictures. The upper left was our construction office, actually, and staging area for the original downtown project. And then here's just a chart of population growth in the downtown overlaid with our initial planning on the downtown project. And then we could talk about the expansion planning. Streetcar is not the only factor. We know that we're in an environment with lots of other decisions, but we're hearing from developers that it is a significant contributing factor to people's decisions for locating on Main Street, and it's a differentiator for our downtown. That is very clear. So right after we opened, really by 2017, we were seeing the benefits, and we were asking ourselves, how do we extend those benefits? How do we continue to make progress on building out a spine of a system? So transitioning from a downtown starter line to the spine of a regional system. So you see the map on the right, and that's not just a streetcar system, that's a transit system. So bus connections, east-west connections, paratransit, all of those things. We're one route in a multimodal transit network. And so we needed to advance and reposition ourselves, obviously, to serve that function as a connector and as a spine, and really as an organizing principle, not just for transit service, but for a reinvestment and regrowth of our core. And so we got to work on these two projects, the Main Street extension, the big red line there, 3.5 miles south, and then north to the River Market. So obviously none of this happens without local money and federal money. And again, because of the results of advocacy, David and others, and leadership, we were able to advance a plan, different plans for the different projects, but with no redirection of city general fund money, 100% new money, essentially advance what now amounts to almost a $400 million total program between the two projects, funded, generally speaking, half local money, new local money, through our Transportation Development District and local sources, revenue capture off of new development, et cetera, and half federal, leveraging that new local to secure new starts funding, as well as build grant funding for the Northern project to, again, advance a whole tripling of the system really over the course of the next 36 months. So where are we now? Obviously, here's a rendering of the Main Street extension heading south from Union Station. Obviously, what this means to reconnect our two largest employment centers, student housing, our major university, and again, reinforcing this Main Street as the spine of the region, both transit and of people. And employment is really exciting and going to be transformational, we know. Here's a few pictures from transitioning from that rendering to real work. These are actually fully constructed segments now of streetcar, and you can see some of these here, obviously extending downtown in the horizon, south through Midtown, so our densest residential neighborhoods. And then obviously gearing up for, on the back end of our construction in 23 and 24, will be the build out of the stations like this. And what you'll see is they're bigger in many cases. They have more storage capacity, really representing that change in function from a downtown circulator to the spine of a system. And then looking north, again, we've got obviously a shorter, approximately 3/4 of a mile extension from our River Market to Berkeley Riverfront Park. And there's a long story about the history of Berkeley Riverfront and what it was and what it is and what we hope it will be. But streetcar is part of a multimodal plan to regrow and reconnect our riverfront as part of creating a great place, right, to live, work, and play. And it's been an underutilized asset, and many reasons for that is the connectivity has been challenged. It really does sit on an island. And what we will be doing is advancing streetcar connection along with bike ped improvements to reconnect really from a multimodal standpoint, the riverfront really to the rest of the downtown core to build on the energy and to help activate development. And here's just a few renderings of sort of running on the fringe. I always like to say, I think it's going to be a new postcard for Kansas City. And obviously, when we started this planning, there wasn't a single building on the riverfront. Now we have well over 1,000 units built and under construction, and we have a new women's professional soccer stadium planned and under construction now at this very site. That again wouldn't be possible without a plan to connect it with multimodal transportation options, because it is limited from a parking standpoint and traditional. So the last thing I want to say and then pass the torch to David is we're marching both of these projects forward. We have Main Street really fully under construction. We're about a third of the way built on that project. It'll be done with construction in mid-24, opening in 2025. The riverfront is a little bit behind that. We've completed 100% design. We've put out various packages for construction that are outlined here. Actually, most of the smaller ones. The big construction package will be going out by the end of the month. So if there's anybody on the webinar interested in bid opportunities, we have information on our website at the link there. Also, this project is a partnership with the ATA, or the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, and they will actually be posting the formal bid documents on their website as the federal grantee for the project. And we will be using a combination of federal and local funds if you're interested in those details. So we're excited about both. This is also done. We're forecasting being completed fully in 2025, and again we'll be moving from a 2.5 mile to over a 6.5 mile spine, and operating, moving from 6 vehicle fleet to 14 vehicle fleet. Really, again, operating the spine of the region's transit system, and it'll look obviously very different. So those are in process, and we also are on top of that having conversations. We have a public meeting tonight on east-west opportunities, and we've advanced plans for north of the river to develop some concepts and some support. So we're starting the work already on the next generation of expansions after these to see if there's a public appetite, to figure out things that David will talk about for how might we scale resources to do what we want to do going forward. So I'm going to stop talking, stop my share, and I will go ahead and pass the torch back to Kim.
Thank you, Tom. That really exciting to see where you're at in the Kansas City region with regards to the streetcar and its integration with the rest of the transit system there as well. So now we're going to turn it over to David Johnson. As I mentioned before, David wears several hats. He's not only an MPTA board member and project leader at TransPro, he's also the chair of the Kansas City Regional Transit Alliance. So we're going to turn it over to David this morning. David, if you can provide us an update on the regional conversations in the works with regards to future expansions, and how do we fund those expansions? What is on the table in Kansas City? David, I think you're muted. We're 3 years into Zoom and it's still awkward for everyone.
I do this for a living. Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Tom, for that great lead-in. So again, David Johnson, chair of the Kansas City Regional Transit Alliance. I've got a little bit of a unique perspective on this topic, and so I wanted to share that with you this morning, a little bit about our strategic plan for trying to make that happen. And as Tom mentioned, there are 2 additional studies underway to expand the streetcar even further beyond what's under construction. And so without an accepted or known way to fund those projects locally, this is where the regional funding conversation becomes really critical. So beyond streetcar, there's actually a much bigger problem in Kansas City when it comes to job access. And you may have seen various studies that indicate Kansas City ranks very, very low when it comes to job access through public transportation. And we haven't really made much of an effort to address that. We've talked a lot, we've planned a lot, and haven't really implemented anything to solve that problem. And we do have these lower wage jobs that are focused on fringe, further out from the existing transit system. And that forces people into private automobile ownership, which eats into their real incomes. The existing transit funding is struggling to keep up with increasing costs. The price of paying a bus operator just went up, as it did in many cities, as a way to address the staffing crisis that came out of the pandemic. And that makes it kind of hard to chase these new job centers without reducing service to others, which is sort of a terrible situation you don't want to be in. The current transit funding is a mix of sales taxes, special districts like the streetcar, and general fund revenues that support most of the service on the Kansas side of our region. And that latter source, general fund, is of course fighting for priority against other needs, primarily public safety, which is probably one of the bigger spending items in most general municipal budgets. A regional transportation authority exists. That is the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, where I used to work, but it does not have a regional revenue source. It's basically a patchwork of individual service contracts, starting with Kansas City as the largest and all the way down to Grandview, providing, around $25,000 for a minimal amount of service to that suburb. And as a result, fractured governance has evolved here, despite having this regional authority. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with the lack of a revenue source. So when people go to the Regional Transportation Authority and say, I need service, they're unable to provide that without entering into sort of a service contract, basically. But I don't want to be all negative this morning, that we have big problems to solve, but we have solved some of these big problems already. We have a regional brand of which Streetcar is part, Ride KC. Everything is branded the same. If you were a customer pointing at a vehicle, you'd be hard pressed to find out who's paying for it and who's driving it and who's just making those operational decisions. That was very intentional, very proud of our regional leadership for making that happen. It's a model for the nation. There are lots of regions that have fractured governance models for transit. I was just talking to a couple people from San Francisco yesterday that has like 26 different agencies in the Bay Area and very little regional coordination, although they're trying to fix it. We have 5 here, each with a different governance model and operating model even, and getting all of those players to agree on a single brand and doing a very public process for that is, we should pat ourselves on the back more for that. We also have a regional fare policy and structure. Currently, that's a 0 fare, but prior to that, we all agreed that every local route would charge $1.50, and the rest of that would all be, interlocal agreements to make sure passes were accepted and no one was, the passengers weren't left short. We also, gets a lot less press, regional paratransit eligibility. So for people who can't use the traditional transit system for whatever reason, and they fall into what's called paratransit, usually for people with disabilities or elderly citizens, they now have a single eligibility source as opposed to trying to figure out how to get from Independence to Kansas City, Missouri, using 2 different systems and eligibility criteria. And then finally, regional trip planning, of which I was a big part of making that happen while I was at KCATA. We now have a single regional feed for all trips. So when you go into Google or Transit app, which is our regional app for trip planning, you see all of the things. And so you don't have to piece together 2 schedules. Trip planning is a barrier, a big enough barrier for new riders. And so eliminating that complexity of having to piece together 2 schedules from 2 separate systems was a big improvement. And so finally, that leaves us with the funding piece, and we'll talk more about our plans for that. So the Regional Transit Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are focused on advocating for expanded regional transit, sustainable regional and local funding that can better connect people to opportunity. And so as we've developed a 3-year strategy that focuses on 2 key aspects. Number 1 is there's a renewal that's going to be required of a citywide, that's citywide for Kansas City, Missouri, sales tax that supports about almost half of the existing bus service. So preserving what we have today so we can build on that for tomorrow. And that has to be renewed by April of 2024. So it's very critical that the city take all of its necessary steps to put that on a ballot prior to April 2024. Then most importantly, advancing the regional funding conversation. And we've been working on this for quite a while. It's in our name, and we've been around for 20 years. But now we're at an inflection point where people have seen high quality transit services implemented in Kansas City, and people respond to those with ridership and economic development. So predating Streetcar was the Metro Area Express, or MAX, sort of our light version of bus rapid transit that we pioneered here in Kansas City starting in 2005 and has since built 2 additional routes. Those have increased corridor ridership and stabilized economic development, not necessarily generated as much as fixed rail. And so we're seeing the benefit of that, and people know those brands. They associate that with premium service and amenities. And so those are now accepted investments that people are talking about all over the region. So in order for us to pay for additional projects like that, we've developed a 3 to 5 year plan with the 2026 hosting of the World Cup in Kansas City as a clear goal line. And that's coming way faster than I think everybody realized. That's actually just in the 3-year horizon now. And leveraging existing plans. KCRTA is not telling anybody what to build. Certainly we have opinions, but as far as our strategy goes, we just want to make sure that the people operating service today, or the people that wish to fund more service, will have a revenue source to do that. And that allows us to also unlock the massive amount of federal funding that's coming towards cities, counties, and states to actually be able to execute on those capital plans. And then leverage existing governance. I think, we've talked a lot about, is KCATA set up correctly? It's a bi-state authority, like bi-state in St. Louis. So if you change certain things, you have to go to Congress. If you change other things, you have to go to both state legislatures or all three. That's a daunting task that we simply do not have time to do. And so we have 5 different governance models. Pick the one you like. They're already in operation in the region. Let's provide more funding for that existing structure and then solve the job access problem. Half-cent sales tax, obviously, this is a regressive choice, but it does work. It does get approved by voters, especially, really all over the region. And so it's the most likely to succeed. And then we're also pressing to have a funding authorization for the counties. Right now, that does not exist on the Kansas side in particular. And Kansas side is particularly set up already with their governance and operating models kind of handled by the counties, Wyandotte and Johnson. So this will reduce administrative complexity and coverage gaps. So you could imagine, with over 100 municipalities in the Kansas City region, if we did this only at the municipal level, one city in the middle of point A and B could decide not to participate. We actually have this problem today, and then you have to decide what to do with coverage when the line runs through that non-participating municipality. And this should also replace any general fund allocations, and whether it's Wyandotte County, Johnson County, or on the Kansas side, or Independence and Lee Summit on the Missouri side. Those are general fund contributions that are, again, being put against other priorities, and a regional funding mechanism that is dedicated to transit could replace that. And we're also not advocating for conducting these elections all at once. It's really up for the region to decide, but it really does need to be leveraging the existing governance structure and at the county level to have the biggest impact. So here's what the breakdown of a sales tax would look like. Again, we didn't put a penny amount here. This is just to show you what the share would be. So as you can see, the Kansas counties in pink and the Missouri counties in orange shows you kind of what the mix is. It's about equal, and that's about matches up with the population distribution between the 2 parts of the metro as well. So as we get further into our work as a nonprofit board with no staff, we're a working board. And so our board members are working through their tactics and plans to make sure that we support the region's efforts for renewing the sales tax on the Kansas City, Missouri side, of course, and then advancing the regional funding conversation everywhere else. So we are now underway and looking for partnerships. We've been talking to a few other organizations. We're going to be doing some polling this year to gauge support. We've done a little bit of that in the past. We did a lot of it with Jackson County when we were supporting their efforts to do a regional rail plan in 2012 that never materialized into a public vote. So we have a little bit of experience in that, but we are looking to partner up with other organizations who may be interested in advancing this topic. Our work plans are growing membership. So any nonprofit that's member supported has to focus on that. We've been a little derelict for a while and basically have 0 members at the moment other than our board. So growing that is really, really critical to sustaining operations of the nonprofit beyond this strategy. And then, of course, our 2 tactics that we've already talked about, regional funding and the sales tax renewal. So I wouldn't be a good nonprofit chair if I didn't say, please join. $25 for a basic membership. Corporate levels are as you choose. And so you can follow the QR code to our website, kcrta.org, and join up today. Back to you, Kim.
Thank you. So we have heard some really great information from both of our speakers today, and now we're going to open it up for Q&A, and we already have a couple questions for them, but I did want to mention, if you have a question, either please place it in the chat box in the Q&A, and we'll get to it as quickly as possible. Also, if you are not familiar with Zoom, in the chat box already, Tom has placed the riverfront bid opportunities available, as well as the detailed riverfront design plans, which are available there as well. We will be posting some of these links following on the MPTA website at mopublictransit.org as well. So there will be a resource, and this will be recorded if in fact you have to jump off early, or if you want to go back and listen to something again. So let's jump right in. It really is exciting, Tom, to see that the expansion is underway in not just 1, but 2. What we hear from providers across Missouri a lot is they're having significant issues post-COVID with supply chain. Has that impacted your projects at all? And if so, how have you dealt with that? Are there any lessons learned that others might take away?
So, absolutely, it has. We've, we knew it 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago at the start when we were starting on the very front end of our federalized processes. And so we built schedules that sort of accounted for long lead items. As you saw in some of the information I shared, we broke out some of the packages on, for instance, Riverfront to advance them early. So rail, special track work, the substation, things that we knew just from experience from our design team and national experts, we were seeing lags in responsiveness on. So we tried our best to break some of those long lead items out to get them moving early so they weren't hung up on some of the other details. And that was one strategy that we've used. Obviously, the contractual method that you use to advance and construct a project also has an opportunity to share some risk on and place some responsibility, but on contractors to own some of that. So we've also used our delivery mechanism through CMGC on Main Street. We are doing design bid build on Riverfront, so it's a little bit different, but that's another mechanism where you can share some of the risk in those things. But at the end of the day, those risks are going to cost somebody. And so trying to be as proactive as possible with identifying where in your project can you reasonably expect there to be delays based on past experiences of other projects, and getting out ahead of those things to reflect adequate time that will be needed is really key. So yeah, and then you just have to adapt. So, you're going to try to plan as best you can, and then stuff's going to happen, and you've got to be proactive in trying to modify your plan, to make adjustments, have some flexibility to try to think about, I'm thinking here at the VMF, we're building it today, and we had to do some resequencing that was inconsistent with the original plan for construction because of some things that were going to take longer and be more challenged. So like any big construction project, you got to be a little bit, you do your best you can on the front end to plan for it. And then you've got to be really proactive so you're not wasting weeks on problems. You got to solve them and move on.
Thank you, Tom. So David, let's turn a little bit to this funding conversation. We just heard your presentation, and it seems that the renewal of the 3/8 sale tax is the top priority right now for KCRTA. So what does that role look like for KCRTA in building that strategy? And how can others get involved if they want to be a part of that process to ensure the success with that?
So the first thing is to make sure that you contact anybody on the city council or the mayor's office, because they're the deciding factor in when that vote occurs. So they control ballot access on this question. And so it's important. They have not yet indicated what election date they prefer. It won't be April because those ballot questions have already been submitted. We've passed that deadline. And so it leaves August and November. So those are the only two options that remain, unless you want to have a sort of disastrous situation where there's a gap in the sales tax authorizations or authorization. And so, contacting the city council and the mayor's office and letting them know that you are watching this topic, you're aware that it needs to be renewed, and you're curious when that'll be placed on the ballot. And then at some point, the elected leaders in the region, this might include me, I don't know, I haven't been asked to participate yet because I don't think there's a campaign, but a campaign will occur that will educate the public and let them know, reasons to vote yes. This has been on the ballot twice before, in 2003 and 2008. And so 5-year sunset and then a 15-year sunset, and voters approved by large majorities every time. So it's probably as safe a bet as you can get, but nothing is for sure. And with, you have the question about what else might be on the ballot, what might be on the mind of taxpayers at any given moment. We are still recovering from the pandemic. There are still concerns about the broader economy, and that could affect the approval rate. So yes, contact the council and the mayor's office, and as to find out what they're planning to do with the ballot date, and then keep tuned in for a campaign that would spin up. There'll probably be opportunities for people to knock on doors or educate other voters, and that will be definitely coming soon.
So that grassroots level is where you may need assistance. Perfect. Right. So while we're talking about funding, we've had a question. Could you say a little bit more about unlocking federal funding? What does that require from local entities? Do they need to raise a certain amount of money to have a dedicated funding source? Yeah. What does it mean to unlock federal funding?
So
yeah. And maybe this is a dual answer from both of you. So if one of you wants to
Tom, you go first.
I'll start. So
okay.
At first, it depends on the scale of what you're wanting to do, because the federal programs, as some of you may know, have many different streams of funding that may go to your regional MPO, may go to your state DOT, and then may stay sort of in Washington as national discretionary programs. And so each one of those has different requirements and different scales. Typically, the regional sub-allocated funds that flows to your MPO, if you have a regional priority and you want to build a project, oftentimes those resources go primarily to roadways and highways, but they are eligible to be spent on transit, capital funds, and smaller projects that have some local match capacity to advance them, improvements, bus stops, things like that, are eligible and could be advanced or even as matching funds. The funds that we captured for the Main Street extension were from a program called New Starts, which was in the Capital Investment Grant Program within FTA. And it's by far the largest national funding source for transit capital projects, but it also comes with the most requirements and rules, literally years of due diligence. We spend over $5 million in at risk to get our Main Street extension project eligible to be to qualify for the federal program. So you have to have significant investment on the front end to ready projects, build local consensus, and then you have to have a demonstrated financial capacity to match the federal funds. In many cases, you're looking at maybe a 50-50 split on big projects, and then to be able to sustain operations and maintenance over a 25-year period to maintain those assets. So you really do have to have a long-term plan. It's a threshold that serves us well, but it's not, I always like to say it's not commonplace in other, we don't hold most other capital investment projects on the non-transit side to the same standard. So it's a really high bar, but it really is important, and it's helpful. The last thing I would say, and David sort of touched on it, was federal or local. At the end of the day, it's really, really important that you have a long-term dedicated local source. So we can't match funds and then operate systems over a long period of time without a dedicated commitment to operate a system and service. And this goes for traditional bus services too. And so in our region, where we have community contracts year to year, really hard for our regional transit agency to justify building a bus stop that has an FTA useful life of 12 years if there's only a 1-year commitment from a local government to operate a service. So that's why for us, having a long-term commitment to operations is almost a prerequisite if you're planning well and you're being responsible to really support and justify capital investment in transit, because we got to support and use that investment through its useful life. And depending on what you're building, it could be 10, 12, 15 years. So long answer. David, you may have more to add there.
Yeah, I do. And it's, we're talking a lot about capital projects this morning because the topic is Streetcar, which is one tool in our toolbox for transit, but it's not the only one. And so what you will never get, aside from COVID relief, which was a very special exception, you will not get operating assistance from the federal government. They do not provide it. Every time it's been brought up, it's quickly squashed because I think the people who don't want a lot of federal investment beyond what we're doing today would see that cost skyrocket if we were to provide federal match for operating assistance. So for unlocking federal funds, yes, you do need a local match for capital projects, but they don't give you money for operating unless it's under very specific circumstances. And most of Kansas City's service do not qualify for that. So we need money to operate just buses, to get to Streetcar, to transfer people and get them to jobs. And so that's, I think, the most important aspect to remember for local funding is you need money to operate the system. Even if you decide to build something with a federal funds, that you need the local money to almost 100% of operating. And so for Streetcar, for example, the special district that funds that project is paying 100% of the operating costs, including the fare, which is zero. And so that was a policy decision we made, and it is sustainable. It is designed to last, and it will last 25 years with voter approval of that special district. So it's very, very important that people understand that operating assistance is a local concern. You need local funding to make that happen, regardless of what the federal government gives you money to build.
And I know I'm the moderator, but I'm just going to say this. I would be remiss if I didn't, as the executive director of the MPTA. State funding is just as critical to this conversation. We did have a win last year, $8.7 million for 34 providers across the state. It's not enough. This is something where people who are joining us today have an opportunity to weigh in with their state elected officials as well. We must fill that gap in all of our transit providers' formulas, that state funding can be that local match. It can be used for operating as well. And it's a missing part of the conversation in Missouri that you don't see in other areas. And so it's really critical that if you are concerned about public transit and its future, that you reach out to your state elected officials as well. Every year we go back, it is I like to say we're going up a very large mountain and the Sherpas leave us behind. They drop us off and say you're on your own. So we must keep that fight up, and they must continue to hear from us because it really is a critical component. So I did want to put that plug in. Sorry, totally off track for questions for both of our panelists, but I think it's a really important point to make. So thank you for that. And thank you for going into a little bit more detail about unlocking the federal funds and that the importance of that local match, not only for capital, but for operating. So let's talk a little bit about the KC success story, the Streetcar success story. We're hearing that other systems are, continuing to lag on ridership post-COVID, but you're seeing an the uptick in ridership in Kansas City on the streetcar, and from my understanding, across the board on all the transit, whether it's MAX or the bus system. So what do you think the recipe for success is in Kansas City?
So we're about 85% recovered post-COVID, in full disclosure. So we're not back to the full 100% pre-COVID numbers, but we've also been sort of gradually bringing our service back to full operations, and we're really there now. So I think, you know, transit at the end of the day, it's about reliability, predictability. You know, does the public have confidence in the service that you're providing, that it's going to be there each and every day? We have a really high bar in our industry. One, particularly for us, where our trips are short, our system's short. If people have one bad experience, they may not be dependent in the same way that they are for a 5-mile trip, right? Or a 10-mile trip. They can walk, they can do other things. And so our bar of sort of public satisfaction is really high. And that's true for all transit, right? One bad experience can push people away, particularly people who have choices. So for us, it's all about service reliability, consistency, and frequency. So the quality of the core service as just a transit service, not having anything to do with what it is paramount. And then obviously we try to accentuate that with what are the things we can do from a policy standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, to lower the barrier. So fare is key, coordination, right? Our design and relationship to adjacent properties, obviously co-marketing events and things that you're building into the culture, right? And the fabric. Some of those things take many years, like building it sort of in as an institution for how we're connecting and servicing these places. So, but really it's the service, and then it's lowering the barrier to entry and pushing as many people through a number of different mechanisms to the system as we can. David, anything to add there?
Yeah, for the broader system, ridership is, I think there's wide agreement that this lack of a fare has made the ridership recovery go faster and stronger than a lot of other systems. And, we're certainly proud of that. I was on the ground of, that decision-making process for the streetcar, and then rolling it out for the bus system as well in March of 2020 when I was at KCATA. And have been part of many analysis and discussions about that program and its impact on mobility in the region and the economic impact as well. So I think if you look at the route level in the bus system, you'll see some routes are performing at or above pre-COVID ridership. And a lot of that probably has to do with just the demographics of ridership for the broader bus system. It's less office worker intensive and sort of, different types of a broad range of workers are using it to get around, and they may not work a traditional office schedule. They may have been essential workers, as we often said during the pandemic. And so that also bore out during the pandemic, where we saw strong ridership in some corridors, especially what we called grocery routes. So routes that had big flagship full service grocery stores and frequent service, what was still frequent service during the pandemic. And we saw ridership surges, at those stops. So that's, I think, kind of the larger regional perspective.
Great. And shout out to your marketing team, Tom. They definitely make the KC streetcar fun. I mean, there's an entire fun element that I think, from this side of the state looking over, really energizes people and makes them want to jump on board as well. So congrats on that.
I would just say really quick, thank you for that. And I will pass it on. Donna Mandelbaum is been with us from the early days, and it does a great job with telling the streetcar story. Yeah. But I would say even before actually her arrival, we had convened a group led in part by the Streetcar Authority Board, but marketing folks, stakeholders downtown who weren't all transit experts, and they helped to think through, what do we want this experience to be? That it needs to be beyond just moving people, that we need to care about some of the details and how we represent ourselves and the brand and some of the in what we strive to sort of represent and mean to the community. So very intentional strategy to formulate a brand and early, and then very intentional in curating that over time. So even things like our advertising and sponsorship programs that we do, you see cool wraps and things that we do on the cars. Behind the scenes on that are, guidelines, our processes, sort of standards that we've set for ourselves that are probably much more restrictive than many systems might utilize to manage that over time, to sort of make sure we're doing things that are additive, building, community-based partnerships, leveraging the unique, obviously, destinations and ridership generators we have on the route to be key in that storytelling. So it doesn't happen by accident. And so the board sort of planted the seed and the flag early that we have expectations around the experience, and then it's all about how do we curate that and try to build on it over time. And that's been really key, because I will say this, we know that in the transit space, particularly when we started, but I think you're seeing it up in Omaha and other places, right? For whatever reason, there's a controversy, right? You're doing new things, you're doing different things than you've done in the past. And if you're not very intentional about what you're trying to achieve with your project, about the goals that I talked about, I keep coming back to them for a reason, to remind us all each time we talk about why'd we do it, what's the big picture objectives and goals, and that those have to be front and center, and you have to tell that story really proactively, where other folks are going to tell your story for you, and it's not going to be pretty, right? Media loves negativity. It's transit operations, and so bad stuff's going to happen. Unfortunately, you're gonna have an accident. You're going to have other incidents, and so how do you respond to those things and continue to tell the big picture story about why the work we're all collectively doing matters is really, really key.
Right. Thank you. So you just touched on it a little bit, Tom. There's much more to transit than just the ride from point A to point B. And, you're talking about the story of public transit, but let's talk a little bit about, and you touched on it earlier, and this is a two-part question. So one part for each of you. Transit can serve as a catalyst for something bigger, for development around these systems. We know that the streetcar is a permanent system. It's not moving in a service change. So we know that the route is in the ground. We know where it's going. How has the streetcar impacted development along its current corridor and those future expansion routes? Do you have a number? How much has been invested around those routes? And then secondly, David, how is the KCRTA engaging around the policy discussion around land transit-oriented development? Is that an opportunity to further the discussion about public transit in Kansas City?
Well, so downtown, we've seen over $3 billion of economic development within close proximity to the downtown route. And we've seen on the Main Street extension already almost $1 billion in property transactions and development proposals enter the pipeline. So we're starting to see, and we haven't opened yet, we're a few years from opening, sort of the land rush that's already been initiated on our extension corridors, where we have undervalued properties, surface parking lots, developers coming in. Literally, there was just one approved by council a week or two ago at Armour in Maine. That's going to be three 10-story buildings and a rehabilitation with some affordable housing on a site that holds, 2 surface parking lots and an outdated Class C office building that's partially occupied. So amazing transformation happening. And I would say the last thing, because this was, there was a disbelief about the economic impact of streetcar when we started, as we talked about, and then the criticism was all this is economic development. But we have a history in Kansas City, in our country, right, for the role transportation's played on influencing the growth of our city, the growth of our metro, the growth of our country. And in Kansas City, we can point to Lewis and Clark, and the 3 trails coming through Kansas City, and Transcontinental Railroad, or the Hannibal Bridge, or early streetcar systems of the 1900s that we built our cities around. or the interstate highway system, right? That for the last 50 years sucked energy out of our core of our city and people and jobs. And so a big part of our rationale for this effort was, how can we think differently about utilizing transportation and investment at large to create multiple benefits, right, that are moving our region in a positive, more sustainable direction, bringing people back to the core of our region. We had forgotten, or maybe we knew, but right, all of the unintended or intended consequences of our infrastructure decisions that we made over the years, and how can we be smarter about that? So just a little bit to sort of combat that. We've got a long history of this. It shouldn't be a surprise. We built our country around infrastructure. It's been a leading indicator of how we're growing, about where we're investing, and we're trying to be smarter about it. So, David?
It's important to note on the TOD question that neither Tom or I have any control over land use. Certainly, we have a little bit of influence, and we try to make sure policymakers in the region, and in the context of Streetcar, specifically the city council and mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, they totally control the land use policy conversation. And then anything that stems from that, whether it's affordable housing subsidies or the use of incentives, that's entirely with the city council and the mayor. So I think it's important that people remember that while we're advocating for more transit and better land use, that the policy decisions are not ours. And that and we have a council election coming up this year. So it's important to reach out. It's very easy in Kansas City, Missouri to interact with the council, especially when they're running for election. And it's a big race. We got 40 people, I think, is how many people will be on the ballot. 6 council districts, some in districts, some at large. And so the at-large people will have to make themselves known citywide. And, you know, there is not agreement on TOD that, you know, we all insularly think here that, you know, we always have to do this and this is the way you do it, and densely populating the areas around existing or new transit routes makes them successful. That is true, but how you get there is a very local decision, and you make sure you're in contact with your council member if you live in KCMO, or talking to people who do live in KCMO if that's a concern of yours, or by extension for regional funding in the other communities that already have transit routes. So Metcalf, Overland Park has been doing an amazing job with land use decisions around that. It's basically more or less a successful suburban retrofit in some sections, still working on it in others. But there's lots of more places like that. North Oak, Linwood, all those places that have lost population because of specific land use and other policy decisions that the city has made over decades, whether it's rampant demolition of housing because it just didn't look good enough to save, and it's much more expensive to replace it, of course, with something new. Those are all decisions that are made locally with city governments.
One other important piece is the streetcar, right, or any other transit at the end of the day isn't the vision, right? It's really important for us when we're talking about streetcar expansion that we're a part of a bigger vision that the neighborhood and that the city has, right? We're a means to an end. The end isn't a fancy streetcar moving up and down Main Street. It's a revitalized downtown with more people and more jobs and more activity. We're a mechanism or a tool that can be used to help, right, advance that vision and make it real. And so we're not going to dictate by ourselves. We know where transit markets are, we know where, but it's all about where is their alignment? Where does the streetcar, we're having this conversation tonight on East-West, right? How does it fit into a vision for East-West connectivity? And how does that relate to what the community's aspirations are for that corridor, right? It can't be it's not our vision for the city. We're implementers of a system to help try to make that vision real. Downtown was long-standing supporters for what a streetcar high-capacity transit could do to help downtown. Main Street, Midtown KC now, main core businesses, part of a vision that was long-standing about regrowing Main Street, bringing it back to the glory days and filling the empty spaces, right? And so really important, particularly as you move to the big capital stuff, right? To be able to justify that expense, it's got to be part of a broader, more holistic plan. It's not just about the fancy service. It's about all of the other things that we can help do that are part of the vision. So the three legs to the stool for us is, as I go around and talk to people, as we think about expansion, is we got to have that. We got to have local leadership, and we got to be supporting a locally supported vision and plan for a location. And then we've got to have, you know, technical feasibility, and we've got to have a viable financial plan, right? That is sustainable. You got to have all three legs of the stool. 2 or 3 isn't good enough. You got to have all three. And that's our charge.
Okay, great. So we are coming to the end of our time. I don't see any, I have one more question for our panelists, but I don't see any others in the chat box. So last question, David and Tom, if our listeners remember nothing else from this morning, what is the key takeaway that each of you would like them to get from this conversation?
I'll go first.
You go first this time.
Okay.
Contact your local representatives or state, as Kim would want you to do, right, about the funding situation. We could do so much more if the people that are serving in office today prioritize this issue. It's not easy because they're getting contacted by, you know, all kinds of special interests and constituents asking for fix this pothole, spend more money on road maintenance, you know, secure my neighborhood. Those are all legitimate concerns. But this issue often gets lost in the shuffle because it's somehow perceived as, oh, well, other people have it handled, right? There's a regional agency. There's, you know, people like me and Tom. No, we have tried to get the funding situation improved, and we've made incremental improvements. But contact your local reps, state reps, tell them this is important to you.
Mine's really the same. This stuff is hard. It's hard. It's hard on any number of levels. And so it takes dedication, focus, and leadership, and it takes it over a long period of time. And so you have to have folks like David who are willing to do the hard work and organizational leadership to do the hard work, understanding that the benefits may be 10 years out, right? We're sort of instant gratification, or whether the finances, how are we thinking about the impacts on the decisions? We do this on infrastructure all the time, right? The stuff in the queue on the roadway side has been in the queue for 10 and 15 and 20 years. We're really good at building a pipeline of improvements and on the roadway side and plugging away as federal opportunities come. We're really bad at doing that on the transit side. Really reactive, really short term. So we need to be thinking long term, and we need to be building coalitions of folks like David who can do the local work, push people, bring elected officials along, right? Build a vision that's supported and stay after it. Because at the end of the day, you got to have quick wins. We get that. But if we're not looking at the long view about what are we growing towards as a region, what's the role of transit, what's the big picture, and how do we set ourselves up to be successful over a long period of time, it's not an overnight result, right? These things are things that really are the culmination of thousands of decisions we'll collectively make over a period of time. And so just keep the long view.
Thank you, Tom. As someone who's been at it for 29 years, you can't be someone who loves instant gratification to be in the transit industry, right? You got to be willing to have a little bit of patience, and that is not one of my strong suits, but yes. So thank you to both of you. This has been a really informative conversation this morning. I really have enjoyed the conversation, and I think others will as well. Thank you everyone else who has joined us on the webinar. We will be sharing the recording of today's webinar with our registrants and post it to the MPTA website and social media channels. For anyone else who is interested in rewatching or sharing with your colleagues, please look for additional information about the Missouri Public Transit Association and our education series on our website at mopublictransit.org. Reach out to us with any conversations you would like to see covered in the future as a part of our education series. And as David said earlier, as the executive director of the Missouri Public Transit Association, I would be remiss if I did not invite you to come on board as a member of the Missouri Public Transit Association if you are not a member yet today. It's really important that we have a broad, diverse voice for public transit in Missouri, and we need your help. So thank you all for joining us. Make it a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.